Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Will, it's Brendan, Boyana, and Andrew, and we've been working on the carbon death map. Basically, FTSE 100 companies, all companies that are publicly floated, their values are freely available based on expectations of their future earnings. They emit very large quantities of CO2. Some companies emit more than others, but generally they're all very polluting. If we want to avoid dangerous climate change, and the amount of fossil fuels we can burn is limited, then what's the actual value of these companies if we include this, this unpriced externality? Or perhaps more interestingly, at what temperatures do companies become extinct? So I'll pass over to Brendan.
So what we've built is an iPad application that effectively mirrors those extinction event maps that we've all been seeing in National Geographic since we were kids, watching panda bears disappear from the world as the climate changes. Effectively what the iPad app does is it maps the individual companies. I think we've got, what, 45 individual companies from a list of about 800, looking at their intensity, which is their carbon consumption divided by their turn intensity, allowed us to look at sort of what their value was and how effective they were at using their carbon emissions. The app itself looks at, allows us to, just using one slider, to increase what the future cost will be of that carbon, whether that's whatever mechanism that's going to be, whether that's taxation, credits, etc. But as the cost of that increases, who actually disappears from global players? So you can see, let me get the... The price down here, you can see the prices going up as, I have to guess.
So this is the carbon price in 2030. And then as we change the carbon price, you'll see various companies will blink out of existence. They become extinct.
The rather disappointing thing is the carbon price has to get extraordinarily high in order to see these companies disappear. But what it does is it gives us a good metric of how efficient companies are actually, depending on their size and their market capitalization, who's actually being efficient about the way that they consume their carbon. And rather staggeringly, Oracle and Apple still remain, even after carbon goes up to astronomical levels.
It will be very pleased.
We have to hope that those are outliers in some strange way.
Does Apple still get to have iPads manufactured on their behalf, though?
Yeah. So this is obviously this is a very simplistic overview of what actually happens in the world. We're just looking at their company's scope 1 and 2 emissions. So these are the emissions that companies are directly responsible for. As soon as you try to roll in their scope 3 emissions, so those include in transportation of their goods and the use of their products and so on, then you start getting into very complex territory. And for a simple sort of rule of thumb indication, something that you can play around with, we just stuck to what you see here.
I'm sure that Apple wouldn't be there if you looked at their supply chain.
Yes, and we're talking about scope 1 and 2 in terms of their emissions. And effectively what we're looking at, the motivation here is to provide a lever to operate on the big corporations rather than consumers. We can all do as much as we want. How many people are wearing Howie's clothing in this room? And it's not going to make that big a difference. But we've got to keep trying. But the point is that if we provide shareholders, the people who actually do have some leverage over the companies, we provide them with the tools to evaluate the long-term impact of the companies that they're investing in, then we give someone some leverage to actually make some changes.
Do you want to say anything, Andrew?
No, we wanted to make, I really liked the presentation on the first day that actually emotions make actions. So here we're trying to actually evoke some negative emotions into shareholders or investment funds, so they could see very, in a sad way, that there are dying companies going away. But Of course, if we wanted to do this properly, we'd have to make it much more complex and complicated and look in sectors and how companies looking within one sector, which we were thinking about, but in the end, in 24 hours, we focused on getting those logos on.
Come have a play with the iPad app. It's of course very different when you can actually make the change with your big finger of doom.
Any questions on that one?
Yeah, everybody wants to be done.
That's it.
Chris?
Chris?
So I'm aware there's a fair amount of thinking and like maths that went into some of this over the weekend trying to actually work out these numbers. Is there any plans to share that or actually make that available so other people could actually build upon it or even just see it? Because there's lots of interesting stuff there that it feels like a waste to only show it a single 5-minute presentation.
Yeah, we did a lot of thinking and sort of modelling about, I mean, there's a whole bunch of assumptions that go into the background regarding projected future growth of the company, what the starting price of carbon is, what the rate at which the price of carbon will increase. You know, all this stuff is sort of being modelled. What constitutes an extinction event? You know, when does a company no longer able to be competitive? So, you know, I think there's sort of two different examples in the background. When they're spending more than 50% of their profits on carbon, they become extinct. And when they have a delta in the percentage of their profits that they're spending on carbon beyond a certain rate, you know, that also counts as an extinction event. But we probably need to do some code cleanup and we'll see if we can get it on GitHub. But yeah, there was certainly a lot of thought last night about how we were going to get the maths to work. So hopefully we'll listen.
All the companies involved appreciate their representation.
Well, to be honest, you could use this either way. You know, if you're a big nasty company, you emit loads of CO2. That's part of your business. Then you could equally use this app to say, look, the carbon price is ridiculous. Our entire way of life is dominated by fossil fuels, and you know, you can't do without us. So, you know, you could twist it around both ways.
We were quite hesitant to create something for lobbying groups that was effectively saying let's not tax carbon. You know, I'm an investor. God knows I'm going to leverage everything I can to keep the companies I'm investing in from being exposed to this sort of liability.
So it makes you think. That's the important thing.
Just one point. I've visited the Foxconn establishment in Shenzhen, China. 100,000 employees, it's the size of a modest-sized town. Raw materials, Chinese coal in one side, Western world, disposable consumer products out the other side. I wonder how much that really is costing the planet in terms of carbon.
Yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't change the data that's being used behind this app and include scope 3 where it exists. You know, we had limited time and a certain data set to work with. You know, we were looking at what, top
We
800?
were looking at the top 800
Where was it from again?
globally.
Yeah, and that got narrowed down to like 45 companies we actually had the data we could work with. So.
Because we could scrape adequate financials and etc.
It's
So.
not criticism of
Yeah,
the project.
yeah, no,
No, absolutely.
completely agree.
As users of this technology, we all have to look at our Macs and our iPhones and iPad and others and say, what is this costing the planet?
Yeah, no, putting the scope 3 info into the simulation would be great.
How many appointments have you got connected?
0.
Great.
Thank you.